morning. Good to see you again. So, thanks for letting us come in. All right.
What a beautiful committee room you guys have here. Good morning. Yeah, thanks so much for having us here today. Yeah, I haven't had a chance to come in here yet, so this is beautiful. Yeah, well let's remedy that. We'll find some time to get to know each other. Oh, okay, good. Oh, in Utah, good. Good. Well, I just came in 6 months ago. New Jersey, that's right. Outside of Philadelphia, yeah. I have. I know Utah well. I spent a decent amount of time going around the parks. I used to live in the Sierra Nevadas in California, so we used to head east to Utah on each side. Oh, it's so beautiful. I'm jealous. Yeah, well, I got some shoreline in my district, so I'm not going to complain about having some beach line. Really beautiful. I'm a diplomat by trade, so I was a U.S. diplomat with Iraq and Afghanistan exclusively for 7 years. Yeah, so it's armed services, so and small business. Well, it's a good one. No, and it's actually there's a real bipartisan meeting with well, hey, I'll sit on down and let you guys. But we'll find some time to catch up.
Good morning. The Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands will now come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on 4 public lands bills. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. And I have an opening statement of my own, but in the interest of time, because we have votes looming, I don't want to take up time in this hearing, so I will submit my opening statement to the record. And with that, we will begin testimony. So, but I'll recognize the ranking minority member for his 5 minutes first.
Madam Chair, I don't know how I could take my 5 minutes after you so graciously gave up yours. Let me just say very briefly that we're pleased with a number of these bills. Representative Kim, your Gold Star bill, I'm pleased to look at that today. Representative Tipton, thank you. Representative Quigley. I think a number of these bills you'll find us enthusiastically supporting. I do want to express just some concern about the final bill, 1572. Representative Quigley, we would like to look at some of the duplications that we feel are already in law, and hopefully this hearing today will be a good time for us to better understand your bill and find ways to see if we can support it. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll simply submit my comments for the record as well.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. And thank you for your statement. Now I would like to turn to our first panel and welcome the members of Congress who wish to testify on the bills they have sponsored. Under our committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but you may submit a longer statement for the record if you choose. The lights in front of you will turn yellow when there is 1 minute left and red when time is expired. Unfortunately, Mr. O'Halloran is not able to join us today. However, he did submit a testimony for H.R. 401, the Lowell Observatory Conveyance Act, that will be included in the record. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Ranking Member Curtis, and my fellow colleague, Mr. Gett out of Colorado. Appreciate the opportunity to be able to be before the committee today. I'm appearing for the committee to be able to advocate for H.R. 1492. the Yucca House National Monument Boundary Revision Act. The Yucca House National Monument in Montezuma County, Colorado, not too far away from my hometown in Cortez, is one of the largest archaeological sites in southwest Colorado, preserving a Montezuma Valley ancestral Puebloan site that is unexcavated. If the rocks that you look around and are able to see may not be that impressive, but it's what lies underneath that is going to be able to answer volumes of questions about the ancestral Puebloans and the farming community that existed in the area centuries ago. This year, the Yucca House National Monument is celebrating its 100th birthday. The monument was established by President Woodrow Wilson back in 1919, following an initial donation of just 9.6 acres by Henry Val Kleck. In 1996, the monument was further expanded by approximately 24 acres. And to date, Yucca House National Monument is surrounded by private land, and access is granted through an easement on private property. The property owner that currently owns the access area has experienced trouble with traffic and parking, and the arrangement is interfering with his ability to be able to properly manage the farm. However, a private landowner adjacent to the National Monument is now seeking to donate 160 acres to the monument to further protect the archaeological sites and cultural resources and to be able to alleviate the access issues. The land has been studied and determined to be appropriate for inclusion into the National Monument. The donation would facilitate a new access road to the monument as well as parking for visitors. It is important to note that the Montezuma County Commission has approved the road parking plan and waived its no net loss of private land policy to officially support the 160-acre donation. In doing this, the county has asked that my office work to be able to release 5 wilderness study areas within the Montezuma County and Dolores counties that pose problems for the county when it comes to protecting nearby communities from wildfire threats, balancing recreational needs, and managing noxious weeds. Those WSA releases will be included in an upcoming bill, and I'm committed to seeing those processes through. I would like to be able to submit to the committee, the Montezuma County, for the record, a letter from them that indicates the county's support for the Yucca House National Monument Boundary Revision, as well as a request for the Wilderness Study Area releases. Thank you. And currently, the National Park Service has minor boundary revision authority. As long as the sum total of the acreage added to the unit is less than 200 acres and the lands adjacent to the other federal lands administered by the National Park Service. Although the proposed donation is less than 200 acres, the donation would increase the acreage within the monument about 6 times over. Therefore, Congress must authorize a boundary revision before the donation can be accepted. I would also like to note that the National Park Service has given my office technical assistance on this bill, and I would like to request that the committee work with me during the markup process to ensure that the next incorporates technical requests from the Park Service that will help facilitate the boundary revision and the land donation. The Yucca House National Monument is one of the most significant archaeological sites in the country and stands as a reminder of how the ancient Puebloans used to live in the area hundreds of years ago. 100 years after it was first granted national protection, I think it is the perfect time for the committee to consider the legislation to further expand the monument. I thank the committee for holding the hearing, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tipton. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley.
Morning, Chairwoman. Thank you. And to the ranking member, good morning. Members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to address this morning and for considering H.R. 1572, the Botanic Sciences and Native Plant Materials Research, Restoration, and Promotion Act. We have to work on an acronym. A bipartisan bill that I've introduced this Congress with my friend, Representative Francis Rooney from Florida. The Botanic Science Bill, as I call it, is relatively narrow in scope. It creates a new program of botanical science research within the Department of Interior to help increase federal botanic expertise and allows DOI to hire new additional personnel. The bill creates a student loan repayment program for botanical scientists to encourage more students to make the decisions to enter the field and to support them once they're graduated. This is crucial. Currently, the country is projected to lose nearly half of its botanical expertise in the next decade as experienced scientists retire and are not replaced. The consequences could be massive, both in the economic productivity of our public lands and in the loss of critical and unique native landscapes. The bill also requires DOI to work with other executive agencies to develop a plan to preference the use of locally adapted native plant materials in their land management activities. Finally, the bill formally authorizes a number of existing plant conservation and promotion activities across the government. Ecology and botanical sciences will help us solve issues such as food security, ecosystem preservation, habitat restoration, protection of endangered species, and control of invasives. Botanical experts, both within the government and outside of it, help to study and effectively manage and guide the sustainable use of our nation's vast plant resources, something that is particularly important as we stare down the barrel of climate change. I believe that we owe it to America's future generations to preserve the environments that help make the United States such a unique and inspiring place to call home. Far from top-down, prescriptive legislation, my bill, the Botanic Science and Native Plant Materials Research Restoration and Promotion Act, would put scientists and experts in place on the ground, in ecosystems, in local contexts, to make the right decisions based on their knowledge. I'm very pleased that Wayne Blodgett, a 25-year veteran of the U.S. Forest Service and 10-year veteran of BLM, has come all the way to testify on behalf of this bill today. He is an ecologist with firsthand experience about the importance of native plant expertise in the federal government, and he will do an outstanding job answering your questions about the bill today. And I recognize the ranking member's thoughts and concerns about this, and I pledge to have myself and my staff work with you and the committee to address these issues. I thank you again, Madam Chairwoman and Mr. Ranking Member, as well as the Chairman of the Full Committee, for holding this hearing today, and I hope the committee sees fit to report this bill out to the full House shortly. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quigley. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Kim.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, Ranking Member, and members of this subcommittee for your consideration of H.R. 2819, the Gold Star Families Monument Extension Act. Later today, you'll hear from Judith Young. Judith lost her son, Jeffrey, in the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut in October of 1983. Now, Judith will tell you more of her personal story, but Judith isn't here just to represent herself. She's here to represent thousands of loved ones and family members who have sacrificed so much for the freedoms we enjoy today. It's that sacrifice that we seek to honor in the Gold Star Families Monument Extension Act. By passing this bill, we can give Gold Star families like Judith's the time they need to complete a monument acknowledging that sacrifices aren't just made by those in uniform, but their loved ones left behind. A monument that has a site selected, that won't cost taxpayers a single dime, and that has truly bipartisan support. If we don't pass this bill, the authorization for this monument will expire in January of next year. Our Gold Star families have already been through so much. They have already endured and sacrificed beyond what so many of us here can understand. The least we can do is support them by giving them the time to remember and honor those lost. The futility in finding the words and actions to thank loved ones like Judith isn't new. In a letter to Lydia Bixby of Massachusetts in 1864, President Lincoln wrote, quote, "I feel how weak and fruitless must be any word of mine which should attempt to beguile you from the grief of a loss so overwhelming." Lincoln understood that there is nothing we can ever do truly to repay patriots like Judith. But he continued, quote, "But I cannot refrain from tendering you the consolation that may be found in the thanks of the Republic they died to save. Let us show the thanks of the Republic that so many brave men and women have given all to save. Let us show the thanks of the Republic that so many Gold Star families have given so much to keep free. We can do that by passing this bipartisan bill and allowing the completion of this monument. I hope you'll support me in this effort, and I yield back the balance of my time."
Thank you very much, Mr. Kim. Thank you all for being here and testifying on these bills. And now we will transition to panel 2. And while panel 2 takes their place, I'll just mention that as with the first panel, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will be part of the hearing record. The lights in front of you will turn yellow when there is 1 minute left and red when the time has expired. After the witnesses have all testified, members will be given the opportunity to ask questions. Thank you all so much for being here this morning. The chair now recognizes Mr. William Shaddix, Chief of the Land Resources Division at the National Park Service. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chairwoman Holland and Ranking Member Curtis and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to present the Department of Interior's views on 2 of the bills on today's agenda, H.R. 1492 and H.R. 2819. I would like to submit this full statement for the record, summarized with your permission. In addition, I would like to submit a statement for the record on H.R. 1572. The department requests that the subcommittee refer any questions on this bill to the Bureau of Land Management. That's the Botanical Sciences Bill.
Without objection.
Thank you. The department supports H.R. 1492 with amendments. This bill would revise the boundary of the Yucca House National Monument in Colorado and authorize the Park Service to acquire by donation an additional 160-acre parcel of land. Due to its significance as an excellent example of a Valley Pueblo, President Wilson made Yucca House a national monument by proclamation in December 1919. The monument is largely an unexcavated archaeological site that consists of approximately 34 acres. Surrounded by private land and has very limited access. Currently, a county road that crosses private land is the only way for the public to access the monument. Visitor traffic and parking along this route interfere with the adjacent landowner's ranching operation, and lack of signage to enter the park through this route causes confusion. The additional land that could be acquired under this bill would enable the Park Service to provide an alternate route for greater public access. Additional archaeological sites on the property, the donated property, would also be included that would allow the Park Service to develop opportunities for the public to understand the social dynamics and migrations of the ancestral Pueblo community. The department recommends that H.R. 1492 be amended to reference an updated map of the proposed boundary revision and to provide for the acquisition of the property prior to adding it to the boundary of the park. We would be pleased to provide recommended amendments for those purposes. The department on 2819 does not object but recommends an amendment. This bill would extend the authority for the Gold Star Mothers National Monument Foundation to establish a commemorative work in the District of Columbia to commemorate the sacrifices made by mothers and made by their sons and daughters who, as members of the armed forces, made the ultimate sacrifice in defense of the United States. The proposed commemorative work has been referred to as the Gold Star Mothers National Monument, the Gold Star Mothers Family Monument, and the Gold Star Families National Monument. Currently, the Foundation's authorization is set to expire on January 2nd, 2020. While the department understands the desire of the Foundation to seek more time to establish a memorial, we recommend that the bill be amended to grant a 4-year instead of a 7-year extension. That would set a new expiration date of January 2nd, 2024. 4 years should be an adequate amount of time for the Foundation to complete the requirements under the Commemorative Works Act for establishing the commemorative work, as the Foundation has already identified a preferred site and has made progress on design. With an additional 4 years, the Foundation should be in a viable position to achieve site and design approvals, as well as to raise the minimum 75% of the funds sufficient to build the memorial. Once the foundation meets these thresholds, Secretary of Interior may exercise their authority under the Commemorative Works Act to grant an additional 3-year administrative extension to allow the foundation to finalize construction documents and raise the balance of the necessary funding. We would be happy to work with the committee on this amendment. Chairwoman Holland, this concludes my statement. I would be pleased to answer any questions you or any other members of the subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shaddix. The chair now recognizes Mr. Frank Bim. Is that how I pronounce it?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Acting Associate Deputy Chief of the National Forest System. Welcome, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Chairwoman Holland, Ranking Member Curtis, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to present the views of the U.S. Department of Agriculture on 2 bills that would affect the Forest Service at today's hearing. H.R. 401, the Lowell Observatory Conveyance Act, would direct the Forest Service to convey land owned and occupied by the Lowell Observatory near Flagstaff, Arizona. Because of the timber reservation and reversionary clause established in the 1910 Act, there isn't an appropriate authority that would allow the agency to process the observatory's request to remove the timber reservation and convey the United States reversionary interest. If this bill were enacted, it would provide the authority needed to complete the conveyance to the observatory. The Forest Service has no concerns with and does not oppose H.R. 401. H.R. 1572, the Botanical Sciences and Native Plant Materials Research, Restoration, and Promotion Act, directs the Secretary of Agriculture and the Secretary of the Interior to conduct certain actions to promote botanical research, generate demand for native plant materials, and collaborate on interagency plant material efforts. Title I, Section 101 of the bill directs the Secretary of the Interior to support a robust botanical research program. USDA defers to the Department of the Interior on this proposal. However, we would like to note that the Department of Agriculture has robust botanical science research programs conducted by several agencies, such as the Forest Service Western Center for Native Plant Conservation and Restoration Science at the Rocky Mountain Research Station, and other programs in some of our other agencies. Under Title I, Section 102, the Forest Service notes that providing strong incentives to the Department of the Interior for staff enhancement may introduce unintended consequences for other federal agencies to recruit and retain botanical expertise and may have broad impacts on the federal government's capacity in this field. Title II, Section 201 establishes new policy to be used by the Departments of Agriculture and Interior that would require locally adapted native plant materials to be used to the extent practicable for maintenance and restoration activities. The Forest Service already has a robust native plants materials policy that meets and we feel exceeds the requirements of this section. Our policy, developed to maintain native plant communities as part of fully functioning ecosystems by promoting the use of native plants and revegetation projects on National Forest System lands, has been in effect and successfully implemented by the Forest Service for 11 years. Title II, Section 201C directs the Forest Service to develop recommended activities for the Departments of Defense and Transportation and the Commissioner of the Public Building Service. The Forest Service has many efforts already in place that provide opportunities to collaborate with these departments. Examples include the Department of Defense Roundtable hosted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, agreements with the United States Department of Transportation for roadside vegetation in western and northern regions, and support to the Council on Environmental Quality and the General Services Administration on using pollinator-friendly native plant species around federal buildings. Title III, Section 301 directs a select group of agencies, including the Forest Service, to collaborate regarding the use of native plant materials. The Forest Service currently has the authorities needed to accomplish this type of collaborative work outlined in this section. I've highlighted a number of projects that represent this work in my written testimony. And finally, regarding Title III, Section 302B7, several USDA agencies currently maintain seed storage facilities across the country, including the Forest Service and the Agriculture Research Service. The Department appreciates the opportunity to highlight Forest Service efforts underway that support the goals of this bill. The sections mentioned above in many cases duplicate work that is being done now. We would be happy to work with the bill sponsors in the subcommittee to provide additional information on our extensive work in this area and address specific concerns regarding policy for the use of locally adapted plant materials, as well as other technical corrections noted in our testimony. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on these bills. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bim. The chair now recognizes Mr. Lowell Putnam, sole trustee of the Lowell Observatory. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Putnam.
Thank you, Chairwoman Holland and Ranking Member Curtis. My name is William Lowell Putnam. It is my pleasure to testify in support of H.R. 401. I am the fifth sole trustee of the Trust of Percival Lowell, charged with overseeing the continued success of Lowell Observatory, now celebrating its 125th anniversary. Percival Lowell was my great-granduncle and founded the observatory to both do astronomical research and engage with the general public about the excitement and wonder of understanding the universe and our place in it. I am also a life member of the Nature Conservancy and the American Alpine Club, and committed to stewardship of our public lands. The purpose of H.R. 401 is to allow the observatory the flexibility it needs to address the changed situation it faces today compared to 110 years ago when the first act was passed. All of this is detailed in the written testimony and documents that have been submitted both for this bill and its counterpart in the Senate. Lowell Observatory and the greater Flagstaff community of northern Arizona have had a long and mutually respectful relationship over the past 125 years. Flagstaff passed lighting ordinances and dark sky provisions in large measure to support the observatory and its long record of astronomical discoveries. Flagstaff has the distinction of being designated as the first dark sky community in the world. Similarly, the observatory has set aside land and rights-of-way for the Flagstaff Urban Trail System, and many members of our staff over the past century and more have served and continue to serve in a number of community positions. Examples include then-Director E.C. Slifer, who served as mayor of Flagstaff from 1918 to 1920, and our current director, Dr. Jeffrey Hall, who now serves as chair of the Northern Arizona Leadership Alliance. We have also brought together a cross-section of community members to serve as a committee to participate in our planning for Section 17. As the submitted documents show, there is widespread support for our expansion plans onto the section, and we have received no objections to our proposals. As a further indication of broad support, I would note that this bill is sponsored by every member of the Arizona delegation, with the understandable exception of Chairman Grijalva, and the corresponding Senate Bill number 242 is sponsored by both Senators McSally and Sinema. I have nothing further to add at this point, and thank you all for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Putnam, for your testimony. The chair now recognizes Mr. Wayne Paget, retired vegetation ecologist at the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service. Welcome, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Holland and Ranking Member Curtis from my home state of Utah, and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate very much the opportunity to speak to you today in support of H.R. 1572, the Botanical Sciences and Native Plant Research, Restoration, and Promotion Act. I'm presenting my testimony today in my individual capacity, and my views are informed by 30 years of federal service as a vegetation ecologist, 25 with U.S. Forest Service at the forest, region, and national levels, and my subsequent work for the BLM from 2009 through 2013 as the Colorado Plateau Native Plant Program Lead. In these roles, I gained extensive experience in the challenges that face the federal land management agencies in maintaining healthy, resilient, and economically productive ecosystems. Experiences such as mitigating the risk of destructive wildfires, implementing successful landscape restoration projects to ensure continued economic and ecological productivity, while at the same time optimizing public use and enjoyment of our federal lands. In my judgment, H.R. 1572, which I understand is not a new program, but is a thoughtful and calibrated approach for funding intelligent, cost-effective land restoration and management practices that advance the foregoing objectives while maintaining and even enhancing the agency's flexibility to respond to complex challenges. The bill addresses several interrelated needs, including supporting critical land restoration-related research, deploying more botanical scientific expertise in key land management agencies, incentivizing private sector production of native plant materials necessary for restoration projects, and expressly authorizing existing federal efforts to combat invasive plants, conserve plant biodiversity, and utilize native plant materials in public land restoration. The challenges to ecosystem health, especially in the western United States, are serious and growing from day to day. From 1985 to today, the trends in acres burned by wildland fires is increasing at a frightening rate. In 1985, less than 3 million acres burned in the United States. In 2015 and 2017, over 10 million acres burned. And it's not just our forests that are burning. Forest and rangelands fires have a devastating effect on the people in the communities surrounded by the fires and on the ecosystems that occur there. It's estimated that over 1 million acres in the West are infested with invasive species. Many of those acres are covered with a highly flammable, non-native annual grass called cheatgrass. Everybody in the West knows this species. Research has shown that ecosystems dominated primarily by native species are 4 times less likely to burn than those that are covered with invasive species. In addition, they provide critical habitat for the wildlife, birds, and pollinators that depend on them. Experienced scientists are needed to conduct the appropriate research and to implement effective land management on the ground. In a 2010 report assessing the botanical capacities in the United States, over 40% of the federal botany employees self-reported that they would be retired by this year, 2019. In the next 10 years, we're going to be well over 50%, that 50% number that was spoken of earlier. These individuals played a critical role in promoting efficient, effective land management and restoration. Losing botanists and ecologists and other experts is a loss not only of people on the ground, but of the crucial institutional memory. And when you understand that there are nearly 20 times fewer botanists and ecologists in the federal agencies than there are wildlife biologists, this is a huge impact on doing the job right in the first place. The scope of the challenges we face are daunting, but there are successes to be built from. The Bureau of Land Management has invested in two eco-regional programs, one in the Colorado Plateau that I was working on, one in the Great Basin, that are focused on restoration of resilient ecosystems. These native plant development programs are collaborative efforts that include multiple state and federal government partners, as well as universities and the private sector, native seed growers and native seed collectors, who are perhaps the key that holds the whole program together. H.R. 1572, in my opinion, helped drive demand for native seed that the private sector can and will meet. This bill, the Botanical Sciences and Native Plant Materials Research, Restoration, and Promotion Act, would provide the capacity for the much-needed research to help federal land managers better meet the mission of their agencies, and it provides for the staffing needed to get the job done. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before this subcommittee, and we're pleased to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much for your valuable testimony. The chair now recognizes Mr. Greg Walker. I hope that's correct. President of the Natural Resources Group. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Curtis. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'd submitted a little bit longer statement for the record so that I can summarize briefly here. As a former executive director of the Colorado Department of Natural Resources, I can tell you that our people are absolutely passionate about their natural heritage in our state and value and cherish our natural resources. We very much appreciate the importance of botanical science. We are grateful for the work of Congressman Quigley and his co-sponsors in looking for ways to restore vitally important plant ecosystems. I'm not here to oppose this bill, but to sound a note of caution about a couple of the details. In the wake of catastrophic fires that have devastated more than 100 million acres of national forests in the last 20 years, there ought to be even more attention on federal management strategies that have utterly failed to maintain and enhance these priceless resources. I have testified a number of times before this committee over the years on the crisis in America's forests and rangelands, including the spread of invasive plant species, the importance of restoring native species, the need for better management of the forests, ways to recover threatened and endangered species. All of those issues are connected, like everything in nature is connected. I wish we could simply create a new federal program, hire some more experts, get them to do some research, and thereby solve all the problems that are addressed by this legislation. But 30 years of direct involvement in these issues convinces me that another federal program will not solve them. I'm afraid it could make things worse by adding yet another layer of the same administrative process that has led to this crisis in public land management. The Interior Department and the Forest Service combined have 108,000 of the most dedicated and passionate employees in public service, and they include some of the world's foremost experts, not only in the diverse fields of forestry, wildlife, parks, energy, and geology, but also in the botanical sciences, including plant biology and plant ecology. This bill, it seems to me, would add resources the government already has, as you've heard, for reasons that seem a bit unclear. The bill would add a number of new employees to that number, undoubtedly growing over time, especially since it appears to waive the FTE limit, and would place new workers wherever the Secretary wants them. It would begin with an authorization totaling $49 million, but for future years it includes the imprecise phrase, "such sums as may be necessary." That just adds to the concern that this vision is not yet very well defined. I encourage the committee, as it moves forward, to add much more specific language on the future size, scope, and cost of this program. I also encourage sponsors to articulate more clearly the precise purposes for what could become a significant new employment program, and determine more specifically where the new employees would be structured, what their work would entail, how it would differ from the work those departments both already do, and how their success might be measured. There's no good explanation for why another new category of workers is so badly needed that we have to forgive or pay off their student loans. Why are they more important to us than professional foresters or wildlife biologists or the dozens of botanists already on the payroll? But beyond the discussion about new federal workers, I'm most worried about the creation of what appears to be new mandates for the BLM and the Forest Service and other agencies to prioritize botanical and plant management concerns in some different manner than their current missions already require. It is hinted that these differences might include developing seed transfer zones with no clear guidance about how such zones would affect existing land management plans, which, as you know, take years of public collaboration to create, and worse yet, implementing habitat conservation and restoration on a landscape scale. Unfortunately, landscape scale very often means one-size-fits-all top-down mandates from Washington. Also, the BLM is given millions to enhance the availability of native plants, which are resources it already has. In my written statement, I mentioned the Upper Colorado Environmental Plant Center, a nonprofit that has been restoring native plant habitats on a landscape scale for 44 years, including for the BLM. I encourage the committee to take a look at the great work that they and numerous other facilities like theirs are doing before deciding on the need for a new open-ended authorization. I would suggest that the loss of important plant ecosystems and the invasion of non-native species that we are so concerned about today is at least partly a result of federal land management failures. The problem is not a shortage of federal experts, it is the inability to make sound decisions, the analysis paralysis that infests virtually every aspect of our governmental process today. A better approach would be to further empower state and local involvement, the private sector involvement that Mr. Pageant mentioned, even decision-making consistent with national priorities. That would result in far better outcomes for wildlife, for diverse plant habitats, and for local communities. Americans have a love affair with their environment and have every intention of being good stewards of the world they inherited. We all want to leave this world better than we found it. New federal programs with more federal workers will not necessarily accomplish that. Working more closely with dependent local communities might. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. And I meant to submit this earlier. I'd like to submit for the record letters in support of Representative Quigley's H.R. 1572. The first is from more than 20 independent producers of native plant materials who believe this bill is important to drive demand for native plants in our public lands, to help grow the industry, and to support public lands restoration. The second comes from nearly 2,000 concerned citizens who believe this proposal will be important for helping our public land ecosystems build resiliency in the face of increasing climatic threats. And I thank these individuals for their support of and insights into Representative Quigley's proposal. Thank you for your testimony. The chair now recognizes Ms. Judith Young, Chair of the Gold Star Mothers National Monument Foundation. Welcome, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I am Judith Young, a Gold Star mother and past national president of the American Gold Star Mothers, who just recently had their national convention in Albuquerque. However, I appear before you today in my current position as chair of the Gold Star Mothers National Monument Foundation, a 501c3 organization. The Gold Star Mothers National Monument Foundation was formed in 2009 with the objective to erect a monument on an approved site within the National Capital Region, which will honor our nation's Gold Star mothers and families. In the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2013, Congress authorized the monument to be located on federal land within the National Capital Region at no expense to the federal government. The current legislation that I am addressing today is House Resolution 2819 and the future Senate Resolution 1673, which will extend the authority for the establishment of a commemorative work in honor of Gold Star families. The current legislation is necessary as the original timeline from the 2013 bill will expire in 2020. The additional 7 years' time afforded by these two resolutions is critical for the foundation to be able to continue the efforts to establish the monument. Since the original legislation, the foundation has diligently worked with several government agencies and commission, including the National Capital Planning Commission, Commission of Fine Arts, and the National Park Service to gain approval and to select an appropriate site. The foundation has worked to complete all requirements of the Commemorative Act Works process and is now in the final phase of acquiring design approval by the Commission of Fine Arts. Working closely with the National Park Service and the foundation, conducted site analysis of 5 potential locations for the monument within the National Capital Region. These site analyses were conducted using established site selection criteria. The only site that met all criteria was a site on National Park Service property near the Arlington National Cemetery Visitor Center, which was therefore selected by the foundation and subsequently approved by the National Park Service for the location of the monument. Over the last few years, we have been working to raise the necessary funding for the monument, which we estimate to be approximately $6 million. Our efforts have included individuals, corporations, veteran service organizations, Gold Star families, among others. Over the last 4 years, we have raised over $107,000 from 4 charity golf tournaments, which of course will not build the monument, but is essential for the foundation to have operating funds. As of June 30th this year, we have raised $500,000 towards the monument, which is being used for payment to our architect, for completing the necessary documents for the various committees, and the hiring of AECOM to fulfill the regulatory requirements of Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. No foundation member is reimbursed for any expense that might occur while they are serving. In addition, over 100 letters, emails were sent in support of our Site D at Arlington National Cemetery when our site was being considered. We found that our fundraising approaches to major donors have been somewhat hampered by not having an approved design that would permit donors to visualize what their contribution would be going towards. That was one of the most asked questions. With the National Park Service approval site near Arlington National Cemetery, we will be able to answer those donors' concerns. And when we gain the structural design approval from the Commission of Fine Arts, we will be able to answer many of the other questions in minds of donors. With an approved site and accepted design, we'll be able to provide prospective donors something substantial and not just a concept. Some may ask, why do we need this monument? The monument will be a long overdue tribute to honor all mothers and family members who know the grief of losing a loved one in the military service to our nation. The gift of these moms and their families were of such value that they can never be given again. Our nation's Gold Star mothers and families deserve a monument designed to relate and reflect their experience, and the property tells their story to the viewing public. The legislation that is at the topic of today is critical to the overall effort and is fundamental to making the Gold Star Family's National Monument a reality. I thank you for permitting me to appear today and respectfully ask that this committee approve the Gold Star Family's National Monument Extension Act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank all of you for that valuable testimony. The chair will now recognize members for questions, and under Committee Rule 3D, each member will be recognized for 5 minutes. And I would like to recognize Mr. Gallego for 5 minutes. Are you ready?
Sorry, my staff is a little rowdy today. Thank you again for all the This is for, and I may apologize, may say your last name correctly, for Mr. Boom?
BM, actually.
Bim,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
no worries.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So in Arizona, we know better than most how climate change, drought conditions, forest mismanagement, and other factors put our communities at risk of catastrophic wildfires. We also know the steep costs, financial and otherwise, of fire suppression efforts. That's why Congress passed the Fire Fix last year to ensure we have the resources necessary to put out fires while also giving you, your, and other agencies more flexibility to invest in long-term fire mitigation and prevention efforts. Given the resources that the Fire Fix freed up, it is my hope that these savings be reinvested in long-term, science-based fire resiliency efforts that have long been underfunded and underutilized. In that context, what type of long-term efforts is your agency working on to mitigate the damage when fire does occur, protect public safety, and improve ecosystem resiliency to wildfire?
Thank you for the question, sir. So on the short term, of course, I know you're aware of our work immediately after wildfire. We implement burned area emergency rehabilitation work, but we are certainly appreciative of the efforts of Congress to provide the fire funding fix, and looking forward next year to have that fully implemented so we can free up funds to engage further in the work that you're speaking of. In terms of our long-term efforts, I think I'll probably have to get back with you on that, sir.
And for Mr. Paget, as you know, invasive species can make it harder to manage our forests in a responsible way, and oftentimes make landscape more susceptible to fire. In Arizona, we have our fair share of invasive species like buffalo grass, and red bromgrass that makes fire more frequent and more dangerous. Can you detail some existing programs to deal with invasive species like these, and what are some of the challenges and benefits of active management of these species?
Thank you for asking the question. First of all, we're fighting a battle that's growing faster than we can fight it, and this bill helps fund the staff and the research to help fight this battle. But we do have research programs that we've invested in. At the University of Nevada, Reno, we have Dr. Beth Ledger, who's working with species that native species that actually occur in invested communities, looking to see if there's a genetic reason for those to be more competitive, maybe, and so that maybe they can fight the existing weedy species. We also have Andrea Kramer at the Chicago Botanic Garden, who is conducting research on what she's calling the native winners. These are native species that we've never used before to restore ecosystem resiliency, and a lot of them naturally expand by themselves in nature when fire happens, and it's a non-disturbed. They're the ones that come in right after fire. So she's looking at those as opportunities to plant into these disturbed areas and see how they will do. We're in the very early stages of this research, and much more.
So you're essentially doing research into native species to fight some of these invasive species, and hopefully the native species that for some reason are no longer there are stronger, more resilient, and will crowd out invasive species.
Right, exactly.
And so, in just to kind of follow up then on those comments, in your opinion, are the current efforts adequate to address the threat these species pose?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Well, in your opinion, what would you think? What else do you think we could be doing on top of that, of what we're already currently doing?
Our focus is really on a lot of species in the Great Basin and some in the Colorado Plateau, but there's ecosystems, as you mentioned, in Arizona with the red brome, and
we have cedar trees over there.
Any research focused on those communities, and the number of acres, as I said, over 100 million acres in the West are covered with invasive species, and only 50 to 70 million of those acres are the cheatgrass issue. That's a lot, but there's a lot of species that are invasive, and we are working with, as I said, University of Nevada, Reno, and Chicago Botanic Garden, but there really are other research.
There's more funding to it. Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Gallego. Chair recognizes Ranking Member Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I begin my questions, I'd like to simply express my appreciation to all of you who have traveled to be with us today. I wish I had 5 minutes for each of you. Ms. Young, I don't have any questions for you, but please know of my support, and thank you for your efforts and all that work with you. Mr. Walzer, in your testimony, you rightly commend the goal of prioritizing and promoting scientifically sound botanical expertise as it relates to land management decisions. You contend the better path toward this end lies not in more federal bureaucrats, with science degrees, but rather in policies that appreciate and empower local and state expertise. Having been a former local mayor, I can relate with that. Can you explain further why you favor state and local expertise as a long-term solution over a program that would increase the number of scientists working at our federal land management agencies?
Well, thank you. It's a great question and really gets to the heart of this whole conversation about how we restore more natural condition to our national forests and rangelands and other public lands. I simply contend that hiring more staff in Washington doesn't do the trick. Mr. Pageant and others here are absolutely right in articulating the magnitude of this problem all over the country. We have seen the death and destruction of massive swaths of forest land all the way from New Mexico to British Columbia, while the Forest Service and universities all over the country study the problem and hire more experts. The problem has to be fixed on the ground with shoe leather and chainsaws. It cannot be fixed by hiring more experts in Washington. And I don't denigrate the important research work that has to be done here and the experts that are needed to do that. But I think you've heard testimony today that both departments have that expertise. They both have access to both the private sector and university research that's already funded at an enormously high level. I don't take away from any of that. But solving this problem is going to require work on the ground, which state and local governments are way better equipped to handle because they understand the situation around them better than anybody else. You can't duplicate that at the national level.
Thank you. Mr. Bim, in H.R. 1572, Section 201, it specifies that the policy of the United States is to prefer locally adaptive native plant materials in land management activities on federal lands under the jurisdiction of the USDA or Department of Interior. It's my understanding that all 4 major land management agencies' internal policies direct that native plant materials are to be favored, with some going as far as to direct that plant materials with certain genetic or geographic features be favored. Does the U.S. Forest Service already have such a policy? Do you believe we need to do more to encourage the use of native plant materials? Will this bill have any unanticipated consequences that will create difficulties for your agency?
Thank you for the question, sir. So, yes, we do have a policy that is, as I mentioned in my testimony, that addresses the use of native plant materials. We've had it in place since 2008. Former Chief Bosworth directed us to develop a policy as part of to recognize the importance of native plant communities. As far as could we do more, it's hard for me to say we can't do more. Of course, we could always do more to promote the use of native plant species, but we believe that we have the authorities and policies in place, and we believe we also have the socialization within our field staff to implement our robust native plant policy. So we feel that we've got what we need to implement the policies we have in place. Not addressing capacity, but in terms of policy and socialization. As far as
I want to squeeze in one more question to
Yes,
you,
sir.
too. So go ahead and finish that thought, but let me jump right in with another question.
Yeah, I was going to go to unintended consequences, but I can stop if you have another question.
Well, let me just address, before I run out of time, the concerns I have about the standalone student loan program that's part of H.R. 72. The federal government operates more than 50 student loan repayment and forgiveness programs, including at least 2 that USDA and the Department of Interior frequently rely on. There's a lot of things in those current programs that are not in this new program that I think are good features. I understand the goal of the student loan program is to attract top talent. We all agree with that. However, if the federal government is having trouble attracting botanists, shouldn't we be looking a little bit more at some of our hiring practices, which I understand are difficult to navigate and can take many months to work through? Do you have a comment on that?
We can always improve our hiring practices. I won't debate that, sir. No, but we do have similar policies in place that allow us to implement loan forgiveness and those types of things that are mentioned in the bill. Yes, sir.
Good. Unfortunately, I'm out of time. Madam Chair, I yield the balance.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. The chair now recognizes Mr. Westerman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. I appreciate your testimony as well, and really in pretty much agreement with all of your testimony, except maybe for the testimony on the 1572 bill. And
maybe I just don't understand, and you can help me to understand better. But I know Forest Service has their own research and development area, and I know they're researching not only trees but also other plants and native species, and there's a wealth of information out there because I'm one of the geeky guys that goes out and reads this stuff, so I know it's there and I've read it. So I'm trying to figure out exactly what the need is to create additional research in another program when the issue that I see to be more of a problem is the fact that we've got research on things that we know we need to fix, and we don't seem to be implementing that on the ground. So it looks like it would be a better use of resources to actually apply some of the research that we have. Even, I know a lot of this is discussion about forest in the west, but I know forest in the south. We've got issues with privet hedge. We've known forever that privet hedge is an invasive species, and we would love to get rid of it. We know that we're seeing research now that even native pine trees, to the common eye, you would just look and think it's a southern pine tree, but we're growing loblolly pine on shortleaf pine sites. We're growing slash pine on longleaf pine sites, and really these are non-native species that have been adapted for those sites, and it would be, I think, in the best interest in the long run to convert those species back to native sites. So, Mr. Bim, can you elaborate on that? Is there something I'm missing? Is there a gap in the research? I'm a huge fan of research, but it just seems to me like we're starting to get duplicative here.
So I think a couple things. On longleaf pine, certainly, I think you're aware we have a pretty aggressive program in the south to reintroduce longleaf pine on its native range, so certainly in agreement with that. And in agreement with the need to do more active management across the landscape. There's no doubt that we need to do more. We're attempting to address our environmental analysis process so we can do more active management on the ground to address the issues that have been mentioned here related to forest health as well as introduction of native plant species. So, as I mentioned before, I think we've got a good policy in place that addresses the use of native plants for our agency.
Mr. Walcher?
There are significant resources already available to the federal government, as you say. What is different, and frankly, if the sponsor's own testimony on the bill says that the BLM has 3 times more botanists already on payroll than this bill would seek to add. So, and references the fact that there are also botanists at U.S. Geological Survey. You've heard about the Forest Service today. If those resources are insufficient, and lots of us, I think, would be prepared to entertain that possibility, then those agencies can use the appropriation and budget process to ask for more. What's different in this bill is different federal mandates that would somehow change the priorities that are applied in ways that are really unclear, and the use of an employee recruiting tool that involves paying off student loans with, in my opinion, without any really good explanation of why these employees are different than all of the others. So the resources, the research, the on-the-ground availability, all of that is out there already as far as I'm concerned. If it needs to be enhanced and improved and increased, then somebody ought to make that case.
And Mr. Paget, I want to give you a chance to respond. You seem to be most in favor of creating this new program, and I know your histories with BLM. Are you aware of the Forest Service Research and Development and
Yes,
the
I am.
NRCS plant
I apologize
materials?
for not adding that. They've done tremendous research. Again, mostly in the Great Basin from the area that I'm familiar with. But there is other research that's been going on. But I just want to mention that these are not new Washington employees that they're being proposed. They're proposing people on the ground doing the work. When I was on the National I only have a second to go. But the number of people to get the job done does not meet the need on the ground. As I said, the damages are going at a faster rate than we can keep up with, and we need more people on the ground. We need more research in the areas that we're lacking, but we also need people. When I was on the forest in northern Utah, I was there for 10 years. I fought and fought to have a botanist added to the staff. I was an ecologist. And I couldn't do the job that was needed to be done. The rare plants were getting the short end of the stick. But when I finally, after 10 years, we were able to get a botanist on board, we were able to finally get some jobs done. We were finally able to protect some of the species that we'd not been able to protect. So it's a system that we have all the authorities are in place. I don't think this adds new authorities. It just provides the funding for those authorities to get done. We have great direction for planting native seeds and native species on the ground, but they're not getting done. We need to increase the demand for native species, and that's coming through the agencies. So I apologize for going over, but I'm very I'm sincere in my understanding of the need for more people on the ground to get the job done. This is not a new system, not new bureaucrats in Washington telling people what to do on the ground. It's new people on the ground implementing the authorities they already have to do their work. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Westerman. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. And we, luckily, they haven't called votes yet, but when they do, we'll go. Mr. Paget, I'll just ask very quickly, why is the bill not duplicative?
Well, in the way I read it, it's not creating new authorities. It's strengthening the ones that we have in place already, that the agencies have in place already. It just provides the funding to get the needed research for other species, for other invasives. As I said, 100 million acres of lands invaded in the West, and we're only touching the top of the surface. We have cheatgrass, for example, that people have given up on. Throughout my career, people gave up on that. And now we have researchers that are finding ways, they're finding success in these species they're working with to try to chip away at that 50 to 70 million acres of what in the West that's covered with that. These are species that are necessary for the habitat of the sage-grouse, for example. The pollinator species, the species that attract pollinators, those are the pollinators are a lot of times the food for the sage-grouse. It's a huge complex system. But anyway, to me, I don't read new native plant direction. I just see new funds provided to implement that on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your expertise. It looks like votes have been called, but I just want to ask one quick question to Mr. Shaddix. The Yucca House National Monument was an important community center to our ancestral people, similar to Chaco Culture National Historic Park in my home state of New Mexico. Currently, the existing national monument encompasses 33 acres, and inclusion of the donated land would significantly increase the area of protection. What additional cultural resources are included in this land, and how will it contribute to the ongoing preservation efforts at the National Monument?
Thank you, Chairwoman, for the question. It's been my understanding that the Pueblo is a great example of a Valley Pueblo system that exists in that area. And a previous study that was conducted years ago apparently found resources on the land that would be donated. It would also help interpret that story of the current Pueblo that exists. We also would like to not have looting of sacred sites and different sites, and we think that protection such as this helps protect against some of that. And so it really helps to help tell the story as well as to provide access. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I thank all of you, and Ms. Young also, thank you for your testimony, and I'm very supportive of your efforts as well, so thank you for working so hard and letting us know exactly how that is coming together. So I thank all of you for your valuable testimony, and the members for your questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for any of you, and We will ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there's no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you again.
May I ask one question?
Yeah.
Is possible to submit a report that's longer than this, my testimony?
Absolutely,
And I
yes.
have the 10 days following today to do that?
Yes, you can, yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Adjourned. Thank you.